AITA and my fiancée does not pay part of the rent bills and calls herself the breadwinner in the family because she earns more. I told her it wasn't because I was paying for everything. When my fiancée and I first decided to move in together, we knew we needed to have the who pays what conversation early. We'd been dating for a few years by then, and although I didn't know all the details of her finances, I did know she earned more than I did. She was working in tech, had gotten a few raises, and while she mentioned here and there that things could be tight, I figured it was more about the expensive rent she was paying at the time. My income's decent but definitely a bit less than hers, so we agreed to split everything 50-50. It's bills, groceries, rent so that we'd both be paying fair shares. When her parents offered us a chance to stay in their converted garage for cheap rent, it felt like we'd won the lottery. This wasn't just a typical garage with a few renovations slapped on. They'd really transformed it into a beautiful two-story living space. The downstairs had a cozy, open layout, with a kitchenette that, while small, was fully equipped, with sleek countertops, modern appliances, and plenty of storage, making it feel like a true home. We had a comfy little living area, and they'd even thrown in some furniture to help us get started, so it really felt like we were walking into something ready-made for us. The staircase led up to a second-floor bedroom and bathroom, which gave us privacy and made the place feel like a complete apartment rather than a converted space. We had our own entrance, our own little setup, and for all intents and purposes, it was like having our own place, but at a fraction of what we would have paid to rent an apartment anywhere else nearby. The rent was only $700 total, a fraction of what most places would have cost us in the area, and on top of that, her parents generously covered part of the internet and electricity bills to give us some breathing room financially. The goal was to help us save up for a down payment on our own place or put funds aside for the wedding without the financial stress that normally comes with moving in together. It was the kind of offer that people dream about, especially since the space wasn't just affordable but also close to both our workplaces, saving us on commuting time and costs. That was huge for us, given how expensive and time-consuming commuting can be around here. Her parents' offer to help us was more than just financial. It felt like a warm, welcoming gesture from people who were excited about us starting our lives together. Her parents were genuinely rooting for us, and knowing we had their support was a comfort as we transitioned into this new stage. We even felt closer to them, seeing them occasionally, and enjoyed the sense of family that their proximity brought. At first, things seemed to fall into place smoothly. We'd agreed on splitting the bills and rent 50-50ths, and for the first few months, that's mostly how it worked. She'd take care of her half, though sometimes I'd need to remind her about the rent or a grocery run. I honestly didn't think much of it because, after all, adjusting to a new shared financial setup takes time, and I figured it was normal to have a few bumps along the way. She'd always get me back within a few days, and I didn't see any harm in being flexible here and there. She's got a demanding job and often works late, so I reasoned that keeping up with due dates might just be challenging with her busy schedule. Besides, I wanted to be understanding it's not easy managing new responsibilities, and I felt like giving her the benefit of the doubt was the right thing to do as we both adapted. But then, after our engagement, things started to shift, and not in the way I'd hoped. It was like some invisible switch had flipped. Suddenly, she was consistently coming up short on her portion of the bills, and the late payments became more than just the occasional slip-up. They were happening almost every month. Each time rent was due, I'd find myself covering her share to avoid her parents feeling like we were unreliable. I wanted to keep things smooth, especially since they'd gone out of their way to help us, so I'd dip into my savings or stretch my paycheck further to make up for her shortfalls. I'd tell myself that this was just temporary, that she'd get back on track and start picking up her half again. But as time went on, those paybacks came later and later, or they didn't come at all, and it started feeling less like a one-off issue and more like a new reality. It wasn't just rent either. Little by little, it felt like I was taking on more and more of the household expenses: electricity, internet, groceries. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, hoping we could figure out a solution, she'd become defensive, brushing it off as if I was overreacting to a small inconvenience. She'd tell me things like, "It's not a big deal, it'll even out," or she'd shift the conversation, saying that if her parents were going to hound us about rent, maybe we should just move out and find a new place. That comment hit me hard because I knew, as did she, that her parents had been more than generous with us. They weren't hounding us. They were checking in because I was covering more than my share, and that responsibility was beginning to wear me down. For some reason, it didn't seem to register with her that my finances were taking a real hit each time she missed her part of the bills. It was hard not to feel frustrated, especially knowing how well she was earning. With her higher income, I thought she'd see this as a chance for both of us to save up, pay down any personal debts, or at least get ahead a little. But each month, instead of her contributions leveling out, I was left picking up more pieces, paying for things we'd agreed to share. It was as if all the financial planning and conversations we'd had before moving in together had just disappeared. To make matters worse, she has this habit of talking to our friends and family about how she's the breadwinner in the relationship. It's not like she slips it in casually once or twice. It's become a regular part of her conversations, especially with her family and close friends. When we're around other people, she casually drops comments about the stress of covering so much and how it weighs on her to take on the role of the main provider. I remember at one gathering, she was telling her friends how it's a lot of pressure to manage everything financially and acting like she was carrying the weight of our whole life on her shoulders. This wasn't just a one-off. Either it's become so frequent that even my friends and family have started to comment on how hardworking she is and how great it must be to have someone who can handle so much. They say it with admiration, assuming she's actually pulling the majority of the weight in our relationship. One time, she was talking with her sister, and she leaned into this whole narrative of being the big earner. Her sister was asking about how we manage our finances, and my fiancée went on about how she handles most of it and that she's happy to support us so that I don't feel pressured to make a lot. It was painful to listen to, especially because it made me look like I was entirely dependent on her. When the reality was almost the opposite, I'd catch these comments, sometimes even in front of my family, and it felt like each one chipped away at the real picture of how things were actually going behind closed doors. Hearing her frame herself as this noble breadwinner started to get under my skin more than I wanted to admit. Every time she'd talk about it, I'd sit there, silently grinding my teeth, while inside I wanted to ask, what are you really covering here? And it's not just talk. The way she'd phrase it was full of subtle jabs about my finances or my contributions. She'd laugh with her sister about how I'm lucky I don't mind her bringing in the big bucks, as if she were doing everything for us. She'd say things like, "It's so nice to have a partner who's supportive and doesn't feel threatened by my income." I could feel my patience wearing thin, especially when I was not only covering her rent shortfalls month after month but also taking on a bigger share of the household responsibilities. I'm not exaggerating when I say I handle at least 65% of the housework. She's always busy, so I don't mind stepping up, but it's not just about cleaning or cooking. I'm the one planning our weekly meals, getting groceries, organizing bills, keeping track of appointments, and ensuring our pets are taken care of. I even handle the practical stuff, repairs, lawn care, and those random chores that just come up. It's like I'm doing all the daily work while also trying to keep us financially afloat. Then there are the things she rarely even thinks about, like date nights or trips. If I didn't plan and pay for those, we'd probably never go anywhere or do anything. I cover most of our dates, whether it's a dinner out, a movie night, or a weekend getaway. If it's her birthday, I'm the one booking the reservations, picking out thoughtful gifts, and making sure she has a memorable celebration. For holidays, I'm the one making sure we're prepared, decorating, organizing events, and yes, buying most of the gifts. The last Christmas, I spent a solid chunk of my savings making it special for us, and she didn't seem to notice that she barely chipped in. Even when we went on a weekend trip last year, I was the one who booked the place, paid for gas, and handled the little extras. And yet, she continues this main provider act, leaving me feeling like I'm stuck in the role of the invisible supporter. At first, I held back from bringing it up because I didn't want to create tension. I'd tell myself, it's just a phase, or, she starts sorting things out soon. But as time went on, it was clear this wasn't going away. The breadwinner talk kept coming up, and it was becoming a sore point for me. She was putting out this narrative to everyone else while I was quietly taking on more of the load. I thought suggesting a budgeting app or even a financial coach might help her get things back on track and maybe help her see where her money was really going. When I brought it up, though, she brushed it off, saying, "It's not a big deal, you know. Things come up, and I'm doing the best I can." I remember standing there, hearing her say it with this casual tone, like all the stress I was dealing with was nothing, like I was overreacting. She wasn't seeing the impact on me at all. But then a few days ago, we were at a family get-together. I could feel myself already bracing for her breadwinner comments, and sure enough, it wasn't long before her sister brought up an old story about how her ex-boyfriend had struggled with her being the higher earner. I knew exactly where this was going. I was practically cringing inside. Sure enough, my fiancé gave me this self-satisfied look and went, "Good thing Op doesn't mind me bringing home the pay." She said it with this air of pride, like she was lifting some invisible burden on her own, while I was right there, sitting with the weight of everything I'd actually been handling. At that moment, something inside me just snapped. I had sat there, quietly swallowing the frustration time and time again, letting her run with this narrative while I took on more and more. But I couldn't let it slide this time. Not when it felt like she was erasing everything I did to keep us afloat just so she could hold onto her breadwinner badge in front of everyone. I looked at her, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the heat in my words as I said, "Just because you earn more doesn't make you the breadwinner when you blow all your money on yourself. And I end up paying most of the bills." The words hung in the air like a gust of cold wind cutting through the room. The silence was immediate, thick, and heavy. You could have heard a pin drop. Her face turned a deep shade of red, and I saw her shift uncomfortably. She looked around, realizing that every eye was on her, and I could see the embarrassment flood her expression. For a second, I almost regretted saying it out loud. I knew I'd broken some unspoken code by bringing this into the open. But then, part of me felt like it had needed to be said for a long time. I had spent months holding back, biting my tongue while she talked about all the weight she carried, watching her soak up the sympathy and admiration. Meanwhile, I'd been putting in the extra work, covering her share, doing the chores, and trying to keep everything running smoothly without ever getting credit. It wasn't that I needed her to thank me publicly, but I did need her to stop downplaying my contributions and acting like I wasn't pulling my weight. After we got home that night, she barely spoke a word to me. I could feel the tension simmering as we walked through the door, the cold silence stretching between us. When we finally sat down, it all came out. She was furious, saying I'd made her look bad in front of her family and humiliated her. She told me that now her parents were on her case, wanting to see what she was spending her money on every month, and she blamed me entirely for that. According to her, I'd crossed a line by airing our personal issues in front of her family. She kept repeating that I'd ruined her reputation, that her parents had no right to interfere, and that I'd made it their business by calling her out. Every time I tried to explain why I'd said what I did, she cut me off, insisting that I had no right to humiliate her like that. Her anger felt like a wall, something unmovable. She was giving me the cold shoulder whenever I tried to talk things through, making it clear that she saw me as the one who had done something wrong. And honestly, it left me feeling torn. On one hand, I could see why she felt embarrassed and defensive. No one likes to be called out in public, especially about something personal. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the wake-up call she needed. For months, I'd tried talking to her gently, bringing up her spending habits, suggesting we look at our budget together, even offering to help her organize her finances. Each time, she'd brushed me off, made excuses, or dismissed it like I was the one being unreasonable. Deep down, I didn't want to be the person who constantly nagged her about money. I love her, and I'm genuinely proud of what she's achieved at work, the promotions she's earned, and the success she's had. But every time she paints herself as this sole provider in front of others, it's like she's rewriting the reality of our relationship and erasing all that I contribute, both financially and in terms of effort. When she stood there, accepting praise for being the main source of income and joking about how lucky it was like a slap in the face. It made me feel invisible, like everything I do to keep us going was irrelevant. I didn't want to embarrass her, but I also couldn't sit by while she built herself up at my expense. Since then, it's been nothing but tense conversations and cold stares. She keeps bringing up how hurtful my comment was, how I've damaged her relationship with her parents, and how she now feels pressured to justify her spending to them. She says she feels betrayed, that I'm supposed to be her partner and not someone who exposes her. But what about me? What about the months I spent covering for her, doing extra to keep things balanced, or the times I had to explain to her parents why rent was late and why I was the one handing over the money? I don't want to be petty, but it's not easy to just ignore how much this has impacted me, especially when I'm still the one picking up the slack. I'm at a complete loss. I'm questioning if I handled it wrong, if maybe I could have found a way to address it without saying it in front of everyone. But part of me thinks that if I hadn't spoken up, nothing would have changed. She'd keep pushing this breadwinner story, and I'd keep struggling in silence, covering for her while she took the credit. I love her, and I want this to work, but I feel like I'm stuck between supporting her and standing up for myself. So, here I am, wondering if I went too far or if maybe this was the only way to get her to see the reality of our situation. AITA. Update. Last night, around 11, I had made up my mind that it was probably best to postpone the engagement. Things were getting to a point where I felt like we both needed to take a step back, reevaluate our priorities, and figure out if we were truly on the same page about our future. The financial issues were piling up, and as much as I loved her, I couldn't ignore the red flags anymore. I'd spent so much time hoping things would change, that she'd finally step up and start pulling her weight, but the more I uncovered, the clearer it became that there were layers of issues I hadn't even begun to scratch. I went to bed feeling the weight of it all, mentally preparing myself for a tough conversation in the morning. But when we finally sat down to talk, what came out in the following hours turned my world upside down. It was like every answer she gave unraveled into more questions, each response pulling back another layer of secrets I hadn't expected. By the end of the conversation, it was clear that postponing the engagement wasn't enough. After a lot of talking and digging into the reality of our finances and what she'd been hiding, we both realized that this relationship was not going to work. As of this morning, we are broken up. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. It was a brutal realization that the woman I'd planned a future with wasn't who I thought she was, at least not in this critical area. But at the same time, there was a sense of relief in finally seeing things as they were, without any sugarcoating. I want to thank everyone who commented, especially those who encouraged me to look deeper and ask the tough questions. Without that push, I don't know if I would have found out everything I did. One of the first things that came to light was her adamant stance against a joint account. She told me that having a joint account would impede her financial independence. I'd never pushed hard on this before because I respected her autonomy and didn't want to seem controlling, but in hindsight, it became obvious that this wasn't about her independence. This was her way of keeping her finances completely separate and hidden. She framed it as a way to stay self-sufficient, but it became more and more apparent that it was a shield to keep me from seeing what was actually going on with her money. I'd thought we were working as a team, but in her mind, it was clear that financial teamwork wasn't even on the table. Then there was the revelation that she'd based all her spending on the assumption that we could afford it, as if our finances were pooled whenever it benefited her spending. Whenever she bought something, no matter how expensive, she'd justify it with, "We can afford this," or, "It's no problem with our combined income." I'd never thought much about it before, but hearing her explain it in those terms made me realize that she'd been treating my income as a backup whenever her own spending got out of control. It wasn't about our financial goals or saving up for a future together. It was about her having access to more money to fund her lifestyle, regardless of whether it stretched my own finances thin. She'd justified her purchases by combining our incomes in her head, but when it came time to split bills or pay her share, she'd suddenly view her money as hers alone. And then, the shocker, her parents had been under the impression that she was practically supporting me. When we spoke to her parents after the initial argument, I learned that she'd told them she was not only paying her share of the rent but also covering my student loans, my car payment, my phone bill, and even the vacations we'd taken together. I couldn't believe it when I heard them say those words, and I could only imagine what they'd thought of me all this time. She'd painted this image of herself as the primary provider, taking on all these expenses for us, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Not only had she deceived them, but she'd also allowed them to believe that I was financially dependent on her, which explained a lot about some of their comments and attitudes toward me. It was a complete betrayal, one that shook my faith in our entire relationship. The next piece of information was almost as bad. She hadn't actually been evicted from her previous apartment, but she'd been so chronically late with her rent payments that her landlord had decided not to renew her lease. This was news to me, as she'd made it seem like she'd left voluntarily, ready to start fresh in a better place. She'd talked about her old apartment like it was just a stepping stone, but the truth was that her unreliable payments had forced her out. And suddenly, her reluctance to move into a bigger apartment with me made sense. It wasn't about wanting to stay at her parents' place to save up. It was because she knew she'd struggle to keep up with the rent somewhere else. All those times she dodged conversations about moving were because she couldn't afford it and hadn't wanted to admit it. The final nail in the coffin, though, was her take-home pay. She'd told me about her income before, but when I asked for clarity, she finally admitted that the amount she'd given me was before her wage garnishment kicked in. She was dealing with significant debt she'd never mentioned, and debt that had led to a portion of her paycheck being garnished every month. The number she'd thrown around about her income was a pre-tax, pre-garnishment figure that didn't reflect her actual take-home pay at all. She'd been so deep in debt that she'd resorted to some side hustles online just to make up the difference. She'd been hiding the truth about her finances from me, from her family, from everyone, really. I felt blindsided, like I'd been sharing a life with someone who was only showing me a fraction of herself. In the end, I got the ring back. It felt like a small consolation after everything that had come to light, but I knew it was the right decision. The relationship I'd thought I had wasn't real, not in the way I'd believed, anyway. This morning, I packed up my things, and I'm taking some time to process it all, to reflect on what I want for my future and make sense of the mess I've just been through. It's painful, but at least now I can start working towards something genuine. Thank you again to everyone who shared their thoughts and advice. I'm taking some time for myself now, and I won't be responding to any more comments.